If you go back to the time when Mr. Rounds seized the private coal royalties, it was pretty clear then that there is no right in people who have their property taken at the state level to get any compensation. It's a matter for Parliament
That's right.
to determine, is it not?
Yes.
Unlike, say, the Commonwealth. If the Commonwealth were to take property, they must pay compensation.
Yes.
And not only did you recommend, or your committee recommend, rescission, you've also recommended, as I understand it, a royal commission or judicial inquiry into this transaction.
Yes, we recommended, in fact, there should be a judicial inquiry, which obviously would then have no doubt about the protection for those 8 resigned directors. I think it's critical that they be before an inquiry, giving all the evidence on that whole matter, and that may be quite a revelation, because I've got a feeling there's been some background where these directors have been unhappy with the whole process. It's not something just happened that night, and I think their concerns have been ignored.
You've also recommended, have you not, that any future privatisation only be done with the authority of Parliament?
Yes, I believe to stop any further controversy on these issues, it'd be far better for any proposed privatisation of any, at this stage, recommendation only refers to electricity assets. But it could be a good principle that Parliament should consider the sale of any assets that really belong to the taxpayer, to make certain it's in the best interest of the state and not just for some political purpose.
This raises, the whole affair raises a very important issue. It seems to me, when you look at the cases that comes out in some of them where there's been a dispute between ministers in the upper house, that governments are accountable to the people, they're accountable to Parliament and all of the Parliament, not just the lower house. They're accountable to all of the Parliament and therefore to the people. And that seems to be an important principle of our Westminster system. It's not just an abstract system, it seems to me that it's there so that governments are accountable to the people.
It's very correct. In fact, it became clear to me our committee debate with the government was really a question about the power of Parliament versus the executive. The executive, and it's happened previously, and particularly under Labor governments, in many ways are almost offended that they have to take notice of what Parliament says or does. And if they can avoid that, they will. And I think this was a classic case of where there was a sense of arrogance. We can just bypass Parliament and do what we like and ignore committees and so on. And that's why I think it's important for our parliamentary system to restore the authority of Parliament, which represents the people. It's a democracy. People in Libya and other countries are fighting to get it. We're not going to lose it.
Yes. And is it an important principle that it's to all of Parliament? Because as we know, under our Westminster system, the lower house is under the control of the elected government.
That's
because
right.
they need to have the numbers in the lower house. Is it important that the government be responsible to the whole of Parliament and therefore including the Legislative Council?
Definitely. The upper house has a very important role as a house of review, and it also has the ability to check what the government is in fact seeking to do. And under the current system, it's very unlikely that any future government will control both the House of Parliament, that the upper house will have in it minor parties, and that the elected government, they may have a majority in the lower house, and this could happen after the election, March of 26, that the coalition will not control the upper house. Now that could be a plus on one hand, in other words, it gives authority to the upper house, but the negative of that would be if the Greens and the Labor Party had that power, then they could then literally obstruct a coalition government from implementing its agenda, because all legislation has to be passed by both houses of Parliament.
Reverend, you played a significant role in this. You were perhaps more than just a chairman. You seem to take a formidable role, and you seem to be guiding the committee. That's what it seems like from the outside. Is that correct?
That's very correct, because in fact it was my vote that confirmed the inquiry. In other words, I had the casting vote. If I had have said we won't have the inquiry would not have proceeded.
I hadn't realised it was so close.
Yes, because the Labor members were opposing it vigorously, and with the other members of the committee, they needed my vote to actually set up the inquiry, and then to pass some of those motions, such as rescinding the sale, which were vehemently opposed by the 3 Labor members on the committee. But I am pleased they did participate. The first meeting they boycotted, then I think they realised it's far better to be there and represent the government's interest, if you like, than not be present. But it did mean we had a lot of fights, but there were some votes that were unanimous. So I was able to get a number of agreements where the vote was unanimous of all members of the committee. That is the Labor, Liberal, National Party, Greens, and my party, the Christian Democratic Party.
It seems to me to be a significant report, a significant inquiry, not just because of electricity, but because of the principles involved.
That's right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nile.
Thank you, David.